please, if you're listening to this and you're a business, month to month is not a good option for the businesses. And the reason is that
as the renter or as the landlord?
As the tenant.
Okay.
Because there is no continuity in your lease.
Information presented on this program is believed to be factual and up to date, but we do not guarantee its accuracy, and it should not be regarded as complete analysis of the subjects discussed. Discussions and answers to questions do not involve the rendering of personalized investment advice, but are limited to the dissemination of general information. A professional advisor should be consulted before implementing any of the options presented. Encompass More Asset Management LLC is a registered investment advisor with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission and only transacts business in states where it is properly registered or is excluded or exempted from registration requirements.
Hey, everybody. We've got Kevin O'Brien here in the studio with us today. We are going to be talking about 3 reasons that business owners should consider buying real estate for their own business. And just to kind of get us started and give a little bit of background on who Kevin is and, what his experience is before we dive into our topic today. He works currently at NAI Excel Commercial Real Estate here in St. George. He's been there for 5 years. And in his past, he's had a lot of really interesting experiences and job experiences. So he's been an IT supervisor, a teacher, a professor, a biomedical research specialist, and he has a Ph.D. in virology, which is pretty incredible. And he is here in commercial real estate, and he's going to be talking to us about why he's so passionate about that and why we should be, as a business owner, you should be considering commercial real estate. So thanks for being here with us, Kevin.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak a little bit about a topic I really love. So I always get the question, how are you in real estate? How did you end up in real estate? That's a good one. So what happened really was, with my former career, I was a biomedical research scientist in virology. To do that type of research, we had to be located in very specific regions of the U.S. that had the facilities to do that type of research. Mm-hmm. And so before my wife and I started considering having kids, it was okay. But then we were like, what's going to be a good location for us to raise a family? And I'd been from Colorado. I grew up there, and my wife grew up here in Cedar and in Blanding. Okay. And we just thought it would be best to raise a family back in the West, close to family, close to the grandparents and the great-grandparents and cousins. And so that was a fantastic decision. Awesome. It was a big one to leave a career that I've been focusing on for probably 12 to 14 years of my life. Yep.
Yeah, that's a huge change. I'm glad that it worked out well for you.
Me too. So, we're very excited to be back here in Southern Utah and really have loved being back here. And so I got into real estate really because I had seen a lot of what real estate had done for other people, other families. They had used it as an investment vehicle or something that they could take money or their capital that they had saved and put it into something that was more secure and that they could create passive income from over the years. So, instead of having to work more hours to try and get more income, they could take what they had earned and put it into a property and then been able to get some additional income back from it. So they didn't have to work as hard to be able to pay their monthly bills. That was really interesting to me. My family had never done anything like that. Okay. In hindsight, I realized that my family didn't have the best financial literacy experience, in their background. Their I guess MO or their the way they thought was that, well, we'll just work really hard and pay our bills, and that was it. And what really struck me is when my father passed away. So he'd been working till my grandmother first worked till she was 93 as a nurse.
Oh, wow.
And then, and she never retired.
That's hard work.
It is very hard work. Everyone was very impressed at this. And then when she did retire as a nurse, she actually went and worked 5 days a week for her church for another 3 years after that. So she was busy till she was 96. And then my dad, he had been working till he was about 77 full time. And then he passed away like a Saturday morning after he'd been working. So he never really retired either. And that really struck home to me, is that, I didn't want to work until I was almost 80. I wanted to really enjoy life and not just, work.
That time.
Exactly.
The value of time.
And there's so much in this world to be enjoyed and things like that. And that was really important to me. And I had seen a lot of other people I knew using real estate to do that. And so I got very interested in using real estate for that cash flow and really worked hard to almost educate myself on free resources online.
Okay.
Free classes, free sessions, videos, lots of YouTube videos on,
Thank
there's
goodness for YouTube.
Yeah, exactly. There's a very large number of free advisors, free gurus, things like that can at least get you started in understanding real estate. And what was interesting to me is, and unexpectedly, I ended up learning about commercial real estate through a series of events that I'm not going to go into detail, but it kind of opened me up to, well, what is commercial real estate? I don't know what this is, and so through some more YouTube videos, I was able to start educating myself on the basics of commercial real estate.
Okay.
And so once I started doing that, it was interesting because, there's actually a number of gurus who like to focus their classes on one of the assets, which is multifamily apartments. But that space is very crowded because, apartments are very similar to residential properties. So it's a lot easier for people who don't have experience to kind of move into that type of commercial real estate.
It's kind of like the next step of the residential real estate space.
Exactly. And a lot of people, the way they look at apartment complexes is that they're like, well, if I have one residential unit, hey, if I have 5 more, that's like an apartment.
Yeah.
And so that's where a lot of people kind of dip their feet into commercial real estate. But I started getting more and more interested in the kind of more traditional commercial real estate. So like retail spaces, office buildings, some of these other asset classes. And then, through that process, learned that there's specific advantages for people who were business owners that were different than just investors.
Okay.
And so it's interesting. And I'm going to go into a little bit of that detail with the first topic. But what was interesting to me is that when a business gets into commercial real estate, they actually can use that commercial real estate to really control what's going on for their business, for the environment. Typically, businesses, when they're starting out, write a business plan, and in that business plan, they put money aside to lease a space for their business. If they're not a home-based business,
right?
They're going to lease a space, rent it out from someone else, a landlord, and then grow the business in there. And that is perfectly, normal, very common for almost all businesses to do that, because at the time of their business inception, they're trying to be save, on the costs, save on the rent, things like that.
The overhead and the capital coming up with that at the beginning can be a challenge when you're a new business owner.
Exactly. And a lot of times business owners aren't independently wealthy, so they'll take out a business loan. And in the business loan write-up, they'll have a section for your lease or renting expense. And so that's pretty common to get those businesses up and, going. And that's a big part of it, is that the business owners are trying to find spaces that work for their budget.
Yeah.
One of the challenging things of that, and I don't know if a lot of people are informed as well, is that as a tenant, you are actually, or could actually be, responsible for quite a bit of expenses for that property that you may not be aware of.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the landlords, especially nowadays in St. George, you'll see they lease their spaces under what are called triple net leases.
Okay.
And so the way the leases are designed is that you have a base rent that pays for the space that your business is in.
Okay.
And then you have these extra expenses. The extra expenses basically are fees to help your property pay off everything it needs to. So this can be things like property taxes, property insurance, landscaping, property maintenance, pest control, things like parking lot repair, HVAC repair. So you have actually a lot of expenses that can be billed back to the tenants. And a lot of times the tenants don't realize that those expenses actually can fluctuate quite a bit. And then if the landlord decides, hey, we need to do a lot of modifications to the property this year, you as a tenant can be responsible for your portion of all of those repairs. So,
and you don't really get a say in who is coming in and doing the work or what the cost is.
Exactly.
On that, right?
And so hopefully, the landlord that you're working with, that you're leasing from, is doing their best to keep those expenses down.
Yeah.
But sometimes those expenses get very pricey. And as a tenant, you don't have any control over that.
Yeah, and that's kind of a hard thing to plan for too. I would think. I mean, I just go straight to like the planning because that's how my brain works. It's
Sure.
like I want to try and figure this out over the next period of time, right?
Yes.
And if those are costs that you can't necessarily account for because you don't know what the landlord is going to, what their plan is as far as the renovations or the changes or using different contractors. That becomes more difficult to budget as a business owner when every dollar counts.
Yep, absolutely. And there's different factors too that, as a tenant, you may not consider. One of those is like the age or the vintage of the property. A lot of times the older properties will be quite a bit less expensive and more affordable. But a lot of times those properties have more repairs and maintenance that needs to be charged to the tenants to keep them operating.
So like your price per square foot initially on your lease is lower, but then those additional costs add up.
Exactly. And so those, the landlords typically, if they're on, it's called a triple net lease.
Okay.
Typically, if they're on a triple net lease, they will reconcile those charges at the end of the year. And sometimes those charges can go up 10, 15, 20%, depending on what happened to the property over the year. I've seen in some cases where a landlord's property had multiple buildings and one of the buildings had damage to it. And so the landlord had to repair that. But some of those costs actually got distributed as well to the other tenants to help, to help maintain the property. And unfortunately, they had no control over any of that. As if a business is able to purchase a property, they have more control over that. And that's really one of the main points I like to talk about is that as an owner of a commercial property, you get to control kind of what's happening with the expenses, what repairs and maintenance are being done, versus, just being told that, hey, this happened to the property. This is your portion. You just have to pay.
Of somebody else.
Yep. And another really big part of that is really controlling the rent growth and the expenses. And so as a tenant, typically the leases are written so that you have a minimum of a 3% annual escalation in your lease.
Okay.
That is a minimum. We've seen it where it's gone up even as much as 8 to 10% from year to year because, market rates have changed, more competition for a space that you're leasing. So for instance, we've had it where tenants wanted to go month to month on their leases and the challenge, well, please, if you're listening to this and you're a business, month to month is not a good option for the businesses. And the reason is that
as the renter or as the landlord?
As the tenant.
Okay.
Because there is no continuity in your lease. And so if the landlord or if the property expenses or the market value for that space goes up, your rate can go up in 30 days.
So essentially you'd have to renegotiate your lease every 30
Correct.
days instead of once a year, or
Correct.
every 3 years, 5 years, whatever.
Exactly. And so as you're leasing these spaces, if your rent is going up 3, 5, 7% every year, you're just incurring more and more costs, and you're not able to put that money to some other use in your business, like marketing, employees, merchandise, equipment, whatever expense. Exactly. Insurance. There's so many expenses with a business that extra capital could be used. And as a tenant, those prices are typically just going to go up. A good analogy I like to look at is kind of like let's say if you purchased a home 10 years ago, a lot of times the people who purchased home 10 years ago, their monthly mortgage in St. George is, let's say $1,500 a month for a house. We are now seeing rents for that same house that are almost $3,000.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And it is. But if they had purchased 10 years ago, their mortgage payment would be the same until the end of that mortgage. That's the same, very similar to commercial real estate.
And that same concept of the longer your lease is, it's like locking in that mortgage essentially, right?
Correct. And then if you purchase the commercial real estate, then you can, your monthly payment or your note is going to be the same for the life of that loan, kind of like if you bought a house.
Right.
And so even though the market rates are going up 3, 5, 10% every year, your payment for that property is not going up. Your expenses will, over time, but you get to control a lot of that. And so that's a huge benefit to why someone should consider purchasing a property through their business.
Okay. So our first reason is the kind of like the fixed costs, right? And the second would be that appreciation in value while keeping that same, expense, right? I mean, essentially the same expense. And so what's that third, major reason that you would recommend for business owners to consider, purchasing? Yeah.
So let me elaborate a little more on that second point.
Okay.
This is really interesting, what we've seen in St. George. And so I had some clients who had a property that they leased out over near St. George Boulevard. They had the opportunity to purchase it about 15 years ago. And unfortunately, someone told them, why would you ever buy commercial real estate? You should just lease it. I spoke with the business owner, and she said she had the opportunity to buy the property for about $600,000. It was a lot back then, but she had the means to do it. But because of this advice, she didn't. And what happened is that the landlord ended up selling the property in the building last year, and they sold it for $1.8 million.
Wow.
And so over 15 years, that property had gained about $1.1 million in equity from when she had the option to purchase it. And and so that was really challenging.
It's kind of a hard pill to swallow.
That is a very hard pill.
Sure.
Exactly. And, and what was hard about it is she was like, my business has been open the whole time. And so,
did she keep her that lease throughout that the same space?
She did. So she was in the same space for about 15 years and was paying the landlord's rent. And that landlord was building that equity and that capital in the property. Wow. And the landlord actually sold it for less than it was worth, and it sold in less than 45 days.
Wow, that is quick.
It is very quick for a property like that. And that's one of the interesting things about the commercial real estate we've seen is that the equity growth, especially in St. George, has been very significant over the last 10 to 15 years. We've seen a lot of the property values, commercial property values, double.
I feel like I feel like we're finally getting an influx of more commercial spaces here in the St. George area. But I think that is a space that we've been lacking and had such a high demand for and very minimal supply for so many years. And so it is a space where I feel like that value, and I guess this brings up a question, is that where does that come in of how do you evaluate that of when it's a good time to buy or maybe it's not, because it's probably going to come down to every business owner's, own personal individualized situation.
Sure.
But how do you kind of evaluate whether it's right for you to buy as a business owner?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And for me personally, I'm pretty bullish on commercial real estate.
Yeah.
I anticipate that it's going to hold its value and continue to appreciate in Utah. It's hard to predict what's going to happen in the future. We have a lot of events happening outside of Utah that really may affect the migration that's happening into the area. And then that demand could really change what happens to the real estate in Utah as well over time. But from what I've seen, commercial real estate is always a fantastic investment vehicle, especially if you can use your business to get into these properties. And so one of the things that we look a lot at is our investment properties versus owner-occupant properties.
Okay.
And so owner-occupant properties would be like if you are a business owner and you put your business into that space. I have a lot of clients who usually look at their budget as one of the big means of should they buy a property at the time. Do they have enough money put aside? And then will they be able to handle the monthly payment based on the interest rates of the commercial loan for that property? What's interesting about the owner occupants is that these businesses have to lease a space for their business. And so they're going to be spending money regardless of if they own it or if they don't own it.
Right.
And so typically I like to talk to them about, you are going to be spending this money if you want to operate your business. So really consider, going through the extra efforts to buy it so that you can grow your equity and your capital in that property. And so, what's also nice about the owner occupants is that they're less driven by a lot of what the investors are looking for in properties. So the investors typically are looking for very high cash flow, a specific percent return on investment. They're saying, okay, if I put $100,000 into this property, I need to get 14% back every year.
Yeah.
The business owners are typically looking for locations that will help the business have high visibility or easy access or just a great location so that it promotes the growth of their business. And the returns aren't as focused on an investment return, but is this beneficial to the growth or progression of their business?
Yeah. Am I in the right demographic area of my target market and clients?
Exactly. Is this, a location off I-15 that works well for us? Does the visibility work here? Who are the adjacent, business types?
Yeah.
There's a lot of factors that the business owners look at, but a lot of times they're not looking for a very specific return on investment like the investors. What's advantageous about that is that they can qualify for loan products to help them get into these spaces at a lower amount than an investor can. And so there's
without
actually
being one of the occupants.
Exactly. So there's actually a selective advantage for being an owner occupant over the investors in a lot of properties, especially when the interest rates like they are right now are higher. A lot of the investors can't get these properties to underwrite or get the returns they need based on the rent, but the business owners can utilize them to grow their business and be in great locations.
Okay. Do you find that most owner-occupied spaces that they also do like a sublease? Can you talk about that a little bit and maybe the pros and the cons of subleasing as the owner?
Sure. Absolutely. And that's a great question. And I love that question because that actually leads me into my third topic.
Perfect.
Yeah, fantastic. So a lot of times what I'll actually see is owner occupants will, if they can qualify, buy properties that are larger than they need.
Okay.
And the reason is that then they can lease or rent out part of that property to generate passive income for themselves. And what's nice about that is that passive income can help offset the expenses for their business to be in that building. So for instance, let's say a business purchased, a large property and they only occupied 60% of it. Well, that other 40% can be used to create passive income and generate passive income. And that passive income can then help the business reduce their expenses because there's less of a note or a monthly payment for them to build that equity in the property because they're owners.
So those other tenants are essentially helping to pay down that
Correct.
that mortgage or that note
exactly
on the property.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And so a lot of times when we actually are working with our business owners, that is a factor that we're looking at is, okay, what is the market rent for this type of property? How much of the property does the business need to operate in? And how much passive income can be created from the additional tenants in that space? What's the demand like in the market? What features are needed to make sure that that property is competitive with other properties of similar types? And so that's actually a big factor in helping the owners then purchase the properties and have that kind of reduction of their own monthly expenses. And that reduction of monthly expenses as a business owner can then be applied to other expenses like marketing or employees, like we mentioned. So
when the business owner is going through that loan approval process, they can actually, if they're doing like the owner occupied with the additional tenants, they can include that estimated income into the loan process. Is that correct?
So it depends on the loan product.
Okay.
Some loan products allow you to do that and others don't.
Okay.
I didn't want to get into those.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. That's
we don't have to dive into it, but I do think that that's something that a lot of business owners are thinking about because, and maybe that's just me where I'm thinking about the risk too of, if it doesn't get rented out or if my occupancy rate is lower than I expect.
Correct.
Can I still make that payment?
Sure.
And, am I overqualify or over leveraging myself?
Yes.
So I think there are some risks definitely that are that need to be considered when, looking at, as a business owner, looking at purchasing a commercial property. But that goes with anything, right? Like there's always going to be some risks out there. There's pros and the cons, and just going through it with an expert to like yourself to find out, okay, this is, is this really what I'm looking for? Yes. Right. And is this going to provide me the benefits and outweigh that risk? But
yeah, that was fantastic. It sounds like, you've already looked at rental properties and passive income from them. But everything you mentioned is exactly right. If business owners are working with an experienced commercial real estate agent, that should be part of the discussion is that, we are looking at what could this property generate, but the agent, in addition to the lender, will look at, can you handle the entire note or the mortgage payment for this property if the space is unoccupied?
Okay.
Typically those spaces, usually take a couple months to get someone in there and get that rental income generated. And so that's a big factor, is making sure that when the business owners are budgeting or looking at their expenses, they can handle that if there's no one in there and there's 100% vacancy. And typically the lenders will look at that as well. So a lot of times when the loan applicant is in communication with the lender will actually not include the rental income to help qualify for them. Just
to make sure that they're
Correct.
They're not overextending themselves
Exactly.
in the event that they don't have that rented out.
Exactly. And so, it's a great perk on the backside, but typically they want to make sure that the business has been operational and, has had at least 2 years tax returns to show that growth and that steady income profit from the business. And they want to make sure that the loan that's being provided can be covered by the business itself.
Okay. So let's talk for just a minute about some of the things that, like, if we have business owners listening to this podcast right now,
Sure.
Maybe what are some of the things that they should be thinking of or considering to find out if this may be a good option for them to dive into deeper and, maybe set up a call with you? What are some of those characteristics of, a business that would be a good candidate to purchase their own commercial real estate?
That's a great question. A couple things I would say is that one is that if your business does a lot of cash and is a cash basis, you may consider somehow tracking that more.
Lenders are going to want to see where that's coming from, right?
Yes. It is. And this is just an overall kind of bit of advice is that even if you are verbally telling people that your business is doing a lot of cash business, it has to be recorded to be, looked at, to be used as income for your business. And so that is a big factor in it. 2 years tax returns, like I said, making sure that you have either equity in something that could be a collateral property or, savings accounts with money for the property. But really it's looking at the profit and loss statements and looking at what the business is currently paying for rent.
Okay.
And, what is out there in terms of property size and loan and interest rate terms and what monthly payment would be for a business moving into their own space.
Okay.
Really, it's a lot of just budgeting and making sure that, like you said, they're not over leveraged, that they have kind of savings or some type of emergency funds just to help in case they need more capital for the business, things like that, and just basically not over leveraging their business. Yeah, that's a big one. And it's just, as the more you save, the more you put away, the better it is.
Kind of on that note, I just want to add in, from a retirement planning perspective, one of the benefits that I see to owners or business owners considering purchasing real estate for their own businesses is part of their exit strategy.
Yes.
So, as they're already going to be paying a lease, right?
Yes.
As you mentioned. And so this way, when they purchase a property, now they're building the equity in this property. They can potentially sublease that to other business entities. And then when they decide that they want to exit the business, whether that's dissolving the business or, turning that over to another owner or, whatever that looks like for them, they can still keep the income of the rents as the landlord of that commercial property. And so that can continue that passive income even after they've exited their original business. Is that something that you see quite often in commercial real estate?
So it is, and that is a fantastic way to kind of, like you said, exit the business market, exit being a business operator and passing that on to someone else. One of the things that we look for a lot of times when there's a business transaction is, does that business own a space, or does that business have the ability to lease a space long term that they're already in?
Okay.
And so if the business owner also owns a building, they can actually lease that building or lease that space back to the business that they're selling. That actually makes it quite a bit easier to find a buyer for that type of business many times. And the reason is that, and what we're seeing is that St. George, our inventory is very low for commercial real estate, like you mentioned. Some asset classes, especially like industrial and even retail, are very difficult to find locations that might fit certain businesses. We'll have a handful of listings, but those listings will be in locations that may not fit for every business.
Yeah.
And so if that business has the option to continue leasing the space or even purchasing the space that they're in, it makes it easier for the owner to sell that business to someone else down the road. What's also interesting is that if you, for instance, if you lease that space back to the group that may be buying the business, it actually improves the value of the property as well, because a lot of value in commercial real estate is based on the strength of the leases in the building. And so, if you are able to lease back is what they call it. If you're able to lease that space back for 5, 10, 15 years, that creates not a guaranteed, but a pretty strong argument that property is going to continue cash flowing and generating income for the next 5 to 15 years, for then a new investor to come in and purchase it and then not have to find a new tenant, but they have the business. And then just having the real estate included in that business sale. A lot of people are looking for something like that. They're looking for a business plus real estate where they can use business funding to purchase both together and then operate the business while they continue to grow that equity in that property. That's awesome. And that's a fantastic way to use your business to create passive income. You as a business owner, if you don't want to sell the building, you can keep the building, lease back to the business you just sold to someone else, and have that passive income coming in from that building that you've already owned for many years. So you know what the building does in terms of operations or expenses and what it needs. And then you can have that passive income coming in until you're ready to sell the building or pass it on.
Right.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yep.
So I guess to kind of recap and make sure that, everybody has that clarity around the 3 primary reasons that business owners should consider investing in the commercial real estate space would be those fixed business costs, knowing what your note is and what that's going to be over a long period of time, rather than renegotiating your lease month to month or year to year, whatever that is. Secondly would be the appreciation or that growth potential in the value of the property. And then the passive income opportunities, right? So those are the 3 main reasons that business owners should consider purchasing commercial real estate for their business. So.
Yep. And there's many more.
Yeah.
There's many things like tax deductions, control of your space.
Yes.
Things like that. Being able to have control for the continuation of your business and not having to move. There's many other factors, but those 3 are very strong arguments for why a purchase would be great.
So if somebody wants to get a hold of you to talk about this more and maybe dive into, a deeper discussion to see if this is right for them, how can they get in touch with you, Kevin?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So you can call me, text me, check out my listings, email me. My email is publicly available. It's kevin@naiexcel.com.
Okay.
Feel free to reach out, even if, anyone just wants to have a discussion about kind of their business and where they hope to go and some options.
Just looking at that potential there.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I think this is super valuable information to any of our listeners out there who are business owners, considering, purchasing that commercial real estate can really make a huge difference over time for them. So
Absolutely.
thank you for coming and sharing that valuable insight with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah.